Welcome back. This is ENCA. We are coming to you live from the Grand Parade in front of City Hall here in Cape Town on a beautiful day in Cape Town, but not a beautiful day for us as South Africans, a country in crisis. Shall we say crises? Because it's really the perfect storm of crises that we are facing, Sally.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that we're going to see members of cabinet today arriving dressed in their finest.
Yeah.
But we cannot forget those very clear public rifts that we have seen. Just in the last few weeks, we've seen our Tourism Minister, Lindiwe Sisulu, take a serious swipe at the judiciary. And then when the presidency says, well, we've had a chat and she's apologized, she comes out and says, no, I didn't.
Who apologized?
And then the presidency
apologized
goes, yes,
for what?
you did. And she's, no, I didn't. I mean, it would be farcical if it wasn't so
yes,
tragic.
True.
But there'll be the show of strength. And further to what you were saying, Judith, is it's got to reach a critical mass at some point. Surely we're heading for a big shake-up, one wonders.
Judith, we'll bring you in a moment. We want to take the conversation to our colleagues outside. Shahan Ramkison is on standby with Dr. JJ Daban. Guys, how's it looking on your side?
Well, we are just hearing music right now from the Navy Band. We're here. What's the song, JJ? You are here in a moment of need. Yeah, we need it, right? We need it. I think we need God right now. So, JJ, let's talk about this. This is all happening in the backdrop of the July riots, a damning report by an expert panel, and a clear indication that our government is failing to secure and protect South Africa.
Absolutely. By the way, Sally is an eternal optimist because she really thinks the president is going to acknowledge that there's a crisis, a perfect, Tulas even as a perfect storm of crisis. There's no president since 1994 who has ever stood at that podium and said we're in a crisis. Because politicians think that when they acknowledge crisis, they acknowledge failure. So he won't do it. He may indirectly say there's a challenge here and there, but forget it. Now, you are right to say we are in the context of this report is something that is looming large over what Ramaphosa has to say. But actually, it's too late because remember that he's in charge now of state security. In other words, whatever that report says, he ought to have known already, and he has already acted in a half-baked manner, and that's very conservative description because under the Minister of Defense, who's now the Speaker of Parliament, 300 people died. And what was the action against her? It was to shift her sideways to be the third most powerful person in this country. In other words, if Ramaphosa drops dead tomorrow and Mabuza is in Russia, as usual, she will be president. That is a middle finger to South Africa, and it's a middle finger to his whole theme that he came in office with about transparency and what have you. Not that that's the only thing. We've just heard an audio clip where he acknowledges that he and his colleagues all know, he says, that state money has been used, right, to fund political campaigns. Now, obviously, all of that is a crisis of credibility. One of the biggest problems that Ramaphosa faces is what one can simply describe as the crisis of believability. In other words, he's going to say a lot of things tonight, but you and I will immediately not believe him.
And that's the thing. Judith was saying that Becky Cele, for instance, as well, should have been fired. You and I covered that cabinet reshuffle announcement, and we were shocked by what the president did. So I guess the question is the president even considerate of the fact that there are so many South Africans who are upset about what his ministers have done? And how much can we expect tonight to hear about that's any different that we've heard before?
The only person who fired anybody was Zuma, and he fired many people. But for obviously now, as the state capture report tells us, for completely nefarious reasons. Ramaphosa can't hurt a fly, man. He couldn't fire his own spokesperson in his office, couldn't fire Minister of Finance, who he knew was stealing for months before that report was even public, right? So I'm not sure who's going to, he can't fire Lindiwe Sisulu, who tells him in his face that he's a liar. So I don't think firing, it runs in his blood at all. I'm not sure whether he even reshuffle his cabinet ahead of December, because December is, by the way, a hot potato. But overall, there is a crisis of accountability, right? And unfortunately, he's setting a terrible example himself. He set a terrible example by not telling us who funded his campaign. He's setting a terrible example by not firing a minister who has glaringly stolen. He didn't steal in a dark corner. You know, he stole in broad daylight.
Right, JJ, we're going to leave it right there because I'm hearing that the Justice Minister, Ronald Lamola, has just arrived. Sipamanda?
All right, so we're battling. I think Sipa is trying to speak to the Justice Minister, but we'll go back to that as soon as we get that connection. Yes, JJ, I'm an optimist. That's not a dirty word. I suppose I'm an optimist in part because we have come through so much in this country. I mean, in 1990, on the 11th of February, Nelson Mandela was standing here against all the odds. How many people at that moment were saying, this country is going to descend into complete and utter civil war? I'll tell you what was disheartening for me yesterday. Reverend Frank Chikane at the Defend Our Democracy event was saying, I am angry. Exactly what you said. I am angry, and I'm asking myself, was my sacrifice worth it? This is a man who endured so much for our freedom, and he's asking now, is it worth it? And he's saying that the next generation and South Africans, ordinary South Africans, now have to move forward. I just don't know how we do that exactly, Judith.
Well, Sadi, so firstly, I think that our country has multiple crises, as we've discussed. But we're not unique in that there is a global decline in democracy. We see that in the developed world, and we're seeing it in South Africa, where South Africans fewer came out to vote in the local government elections, also where you have a lack of trust in institutions. And that's why service delivery and delivering on socioeconomic rights is so important, because what it does is, if you don't have that, you then have an erosion of the legitimacy of those institutions. So there's a global decline in democracy, and there are choices to be made, there are paths to follow. So there's been a lot of writing about, the turn towards right-wing authoritarianism and fascism. And what we're seeing in South Africa is strains of that, of nativism and so on, in the xenophobia, in the violence around truck drivers, people taking our jobs. The question is whether the ANC and the President tonight will say anything about that. But it is really, what we need to be doing is reclaiming our democracy. In grand transitions, that is what happens. The people start saying, we make our voices heard. So that's one way. So right. Let's go back to Sipa, because I think things are starting to develop outside. Sipa, tell us what's happening.
Well, indeed, we've just spotted the arrival of the leader of the UDM, General Bantu Olomisa. The leader of COP, Msiwa Likota, is on the other side. We will get a comment from them about what they expect from the President's State of the Nation address. But this man is Mkolisi Tuwana. He's all the way from the Free State. Last time I checked where Cocktail Missy, is that still the case? Yes. Service delivery related issues in the Free State, but rather, are central. People protest and complain about water all the time. Your province is one of those that is still struggling with the bucket system. Issues of water, electricity, even refuse removal in Mangaung features strongly. When the President speaks here, provinces will have to implement whatever would have been said by the President. When are you going to fix the Free State once and for all?
I think we have actually pointed out that the challenges that we've been having are challenges of prompt leadership, decisive leadership, and that's what we're going to be dealing with now.
Can I pause you for now? I've just spotted Nkosi Mandela. I'll come back to you. I'm sorry about that. Nkosi, historic moment. 30 years ago, 32 years ago, your grandfather addressed thousands of people who had gathered here at the City Hall. The State of the Nation address is being delivered here. A unique moment indeed. How does it feel?
It is a very emotional moment for us to witness His Excellency President Ramaphosa delivering his State of the Nation in this historic site where Madiba delivered his first speech as a free man. But we also recall that this year it's the 60th anniversary when Madiba left the country as David Mutsamai, going into Africa, mobilizing for our struggle for liberation, visiting countries like Ethiopia, Tanzania. He received his military training in Algeria with Robert Risha. So we hope that the president, on this historic day, on this historic site, he will touch on the role that the African frontline states played in support of our struggle for liberation.
And also, yes, to touch on issues of service delivery, particularly rural development. You lead people of Umvezo, abantu basemakaya ekuhlaleni, they need service delivery and issues of traditional leadership as well. What do you expect in that regard?
Well, in that regard, the traditional leaders are very clear on the issue of land in particular. We want 1913 removed so that it can enable a number of our traditional leaders who are in the forefront of the fight against land disposition to be able to claim their land, particularly the historic traditional leaders that were the first prisoners on Robben Island, like Auchumayo, Sandile, Makoma, Langalbalele, Anta, Siole, and many more others. But also on service delivery, our people want basic service delivery, such as access to clean drinkable water. You spoke about Mvezo earlier on. 27 years later into our democracy, we still don't have access to clean drinkable water. And that is the fate of many rural communities right across our country. But we're also looking for proper road infrastructure, proper schooling infrastructure. I visited a community of Kwakyu last week in Western Tembuland, where the young people there were saying that they go to school with no electricity in this time of COVID, where we have to rely on online services.
It's the ANC-led government that was meant to do that. It's your grandfather's party that was meant to do that. Why has it not provided those services?
We should accept our shortcomings and failures, and most of that has been at the hands of the endemic corruption that we have been facing. And I think if we don't deal harshly with corruption, this is the fate of our people.
You mentioned corruption. The Zondo Commission report is out. The PPE report of the SIU is also out. The July unrest report is also out. What do you make of the state of the nation in South Africa?
Simply put, time for talking is over. The president must take decisive steps into ensuring that action is taken against those that have been found doing wrong. Thank you.
Inkosi Mandela, as we try and get more comment here, we will revert back to the people that we have spoken to. I see General Bantu Olomisa is already here. Let's take him now just for a minute, and then he will continue with other colleagues. But we'll try and get a comment from General Bantu Olomisa. As I see more and more people arriving here, we will be keeping tabs. But for now, let's take it back to you. We'll ask you to come back to us once we've got General Bantu Olomisa.